Hello, everybody, and welcome to our meeting of Dr. Gwilym Morus-Baird. We're doing this series as part of the team that is going to partake in the Sacred Druids Tour in September 2025. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to introduce Dr. Gwilym Morus-Baird. He is my teacher, I'm privileged to say. He might not think he's privileged to teach me, but I know it's a privilege for him to teach me. And Gwilym hails from the heart of Wales. He's dedicated his life to researching Celtic wisdom, literature, myth, and history, helping others all around the world and around the globe to immerse themselves and engage themselves in his online courses. Gwilym is a Welsh literature degree at Bangor University, continuing to complete a master's and doctorate. It's getting bigger there, Gwilym. Specialising in medieval Welsh poetry and the Welsh bardic tradition, but that's not all. You see, and I know Gwilym starts to shrink in his seat when I go on. He's also an accomplished musician, having hauntingly beautiful music. He's released several Welsh language albums and has over 2 decades of experience in songwriting and performing, as well as production, theatre and storytelling. Welcome to our modern day Welsh bard, Dr. Gwilym.
Hello, Deborah. It is always a privilege to talk to you, Deborah. And modern Welsh bard, you just got to not think that I wear green tights or a feather on my cap. That's the deal.
Or wander the country with a harp under your arm.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Although I do think there's something missing there that you could be latching onto, right?
Yeah, maybe. Harps are nice. They're beautiful, but they're a bit of a pain to carry around. Guitars are much easier, yeah.
And tight snag on brambles.
Yeah, exactly. Tight snagging on brambles. Ooh, we don't want that, do we?
Absolutely not. Well, thank you for being with us. And I wanted everybody to know who you were and what we were doing on the tour. So I'm going to start off by asking you a little bit about your background and what first sparked your interest in Celtic studies.
Ooh, that's always, I've been asked the question a few times and it's always a biggie. I suppose the short answer is, I was the only Welsh kid in a Welsh family, or Welsh-speaking kid in a Welsh-speaking family on a street that was otherwise mainly English-speaking. In a Welsh town, of course, on the Welsh borders. Went to Welsh language school, but growing up as a first language Welsh speaker in a very English-speaking culture. Like everything is in English, films, TV, radio. We have Welsh media, of course, but, in the majority, most of our cultural exposure is through English. And so it creates this situation where, as a Welsh language speaker, you think to yourself, well, what is my tradition? What is this being Welsh all about? And some people, some Welsh speakers aren't that bothered, as you might expect, but some of us do have like this curiosity as to what it all means. And so that naturally leads to an exploration of, the Welsh tradition. And mainly that comes through literature. A lot of it does come through music in Wales, but, so I started performing the Welsh folk songs that my mother used to sing with us. And that was my sort of path into being a Welsh musician, as a Welsh folk musician, I suppose, folk doing a lot of work there because I did loads of other types of music too, all through, through the Welsh medium, singing in Welsh. And also I wanted to know more about I suppose the spiritual dimension of my culture, which does come through the music for certain, particularly choir singing, and the more meaningful folk songs, but it also comes through myth and poetry. And so that led me onto a fascination with, traditional Welsh poetry and the Welsh bardic tradition, which eventually leads to me going as a mature student to do a degree in Welsh literature and creative writing. And I stayed, I suppose. I stayed at the university. And as you said, I went on to do an MA and a PhD eventually. and loved every minute of it because it was, I was being guided by my lecturers and teachers and supervisors through the history of my tradition. And it's something that I've just kept doing, I suppose. One of the reasons why I do the work I do is it enables me to just keep researching. I mean, I am the eternal student. It's like I've never really stopped. Like the work I do with you guys on the courses, I'm always making new courses because
Yep.
I always want to find out new stuff. I'm always wanting to learn. So it's like it's a very
And the people are wanting to know as well.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're on the journey.
Yeah, of course, and we're all on the
Appreciate.
journey. And the one who, if you ever really want to learn something well, then go and teach it.
Ooh,
You know,
ooh,
that's
I love some quotes like that.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's like it's what happens
True.
because you have a responsibility to your students and your participants, and therefore that should encourage you to try and have more integrity in your own learning, basically. So yeah,
Yep.
of
Yep.
course.
But I'm going to pick on your research now because there's a great segue.
Okay.
So, your research often explores intersection of history, mythology, bardic tradition, and the spirituality around that. How do you
Mhm.
balance your academic scholarship with the storytelling?
So, storytelling and music and poetry, it's an art form, so it's creative, and we're creating something new, but using traditional materials,
Hmm.
and or referring or echoing or resonating with the broader historical tradition. But to really do that well, you need to know what the tradition is. And studying something formally in an academic sense is how we do things. Yeah. And there's a lot of good in our sort of classical Western education system in the way that we study things. It has its problems, of course. It's not always the best way to understand or experience something, but it is a powerful tool for really getting to grips with what the actual history is.
Mhm.
What can we really say about the history of our tradition? So, it gives us as accurate as possible a description of the tradition, of the materials, and that kind of enriches and gives a deeper connection to those materials that then gets expressed through creativity. That's
Mm.
where Awen kicks in, if you like, as we tap into our inspiration, our creativity, you know, we're not only engaging with creating something anew, but where, the better we understand the materials, the richer our new creation will be, if you like. So yeah, the more of a grasp we have of the threads, if you like, the
Yep.
easier they are to weave into a new tapestry.
Hmm.
Let's say.
For those people that don't understand the depth of Owen, do you want to give it a shot of your version of Owen? Owen.
Mm.
Lots of versions out there.
There's
That,
loads of versions out there. Well, so traditionally, and it just generally speaking in Welsh culture, Awen simply means inspiration. But of course, the deeper into our culture and into our history we go, Awen also has spiritual connotations. So for the Welsh bardic tradition, it's not just inspiration, but it's divine inspiration. It comes to us from the supernatural realm. For most of our history, our bards have been more or less Christian. So Awen was seen as being a gift given by the Christian God. But of course, mixed in with our Christian culture, there are non-Christian elements. So the term Awen itself probably almost certainly arises from the non-Christian elements of our culture. So we've got these different hybrids going on all the time, and Awen is a perfect example of that. It's a non-Christian concept, which means supernatural, magical, enlightened inspiration. But within our, the influence of Christianity, it comes to mean something given from the Christian God. And of course, by today, we can use it in all of those different
yes.
ways. Some modern Welsh poets will see their Awen as being something given by the Christian God. Others of us will simply use it just as the word for inspiration, and others of us again will use it as a non-Christian spiritual concept. So it's still a spiritual energy or influence or insight or wisdom or inspiration, but it doesn't necessarily come from the Christian God. So all of that. Did that make sense there? I think I did.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, of course.
Okay.
And it leads me into, for you as a teacher, what are the challenges in balancing people wanting evidence, people taking the myth, the old Welsh stories, the mythology, any folkloric story that we have in a literal context? How for you, what are the challenges for you as teaching around those subjects?
Well, the main challenge is that it's all in translation. So, I did all of my education from primary school all the way through to my PhD in Welsh. And within that context, there's already a difficulty with modern Welsh speakers understanding Old Welsh, Middle Welsh, the history of the evolution of the Welsh language. Yeah? And there's scholarly debate within Welsh scholarship, within Welsh academia, as to the meaning of some of these ancient words. How do we derive the meaning? What's their etymology? How does it change over time, and so on and so on? So it's already difficult within the Welsh language. And then when we go to translate it, because, I teach through the medium of English, because mainly, and this is why I'm kind of proud of having people like you in the courses, is because there are Welsh people who don't speak Welsh who have just as much right to this material as Welsh speakers. So it's like, I want to make it available to people like you because you're Welsh and it's your heritage as much as it is mine. So, we have to be sensitive to the ambiguity and difficulty of language itself. And then in translation, we just have to be careful that we're another step removed, if you like. And that means we've got to do a little bit more work to understand how these terms were understood traditionally in our history and how they're understood now. And also, in that translation, there are different people responsible for that translation. So, Awen is a perfect example. We've got Awen as the Welsh term and its history in the Welsh language. We've got Awen as then being translated in Wales for people like you and me who are Welsh, and this is what it means for us. But then you've got a whole other community of people outside of Wales who use Awen in a different way. So, for example, you'll find very often in Anglo-American Druidic circles, English-speaking Druid culture, that it's some kind of creative flow, or maybe like an energy akin to I don't know, chi or something.
Chi.
Yeah. And of course, like if this term is a useful description for what you're doing, go for it. Great. But we've just got to be careful that that's not necessarily an accurate reflection of what's going on in Welsh culture, in the tradition as we know it as Welsh people. So that in a nutshell is the issue, if you like. That's the scope of what we're dealing with. And it's not just Awen. It happens with the stories, with myths, with poetry, with symbols, with mythic figures. All of it is translated in different ways. And I try and stay in our sphere, if I can say that, Deborah, for you and me, a Welsh person who's a Welsh speaker and a Welsh person who doesn't have that much Welsh. Yeah. So it's like, I'm trying to make it work for us. And I try not to get too involved with what goes on in the broader Anglo-American world.
My personal golden nugget came when you taught me to take all the pieces of the puzzle and start lining them up, and understanding that's a landscape and a view of all of those heritage components that helps me completely view it. And the critical part of that is the Welsh language, which I don't speak fluently, but I've continued from that moment to learn it in its essence and its meaning. And that's what I believe makes The courses you deliver, very unique.
You know, in one way, we have far more access to the tradition than anyone ever has, because we've got these technologies to help us, and we've got, you know, massive libraries and university departments that have been going for the last couple of hundred years. You know, like 500 years ago, in the Bardic tradition, they didn't have that. You know, like they had to be in the right place at the right time with the right teacher. And for us, it's just far more accessible. So, you know, I don't want people to come to this work thinking, oh, it's a broken tradition and we don't know what it means. And it's like, well, yeah, but you know, okay, we don't understand all of it, but we know we've got more access to more information than any other generation before us. So let's not be totally disheartened, you know.
I'm talking about your baby, and I'm talking about your book, Taliesin Origins. Yeah. And I'm intrigued. What led you to focus on Taliesin for your book?
Well, I mean, going back to, you know, that question I was asking myself as a teenager, you know, what is it to be Welsh in an English world? You know, what is my tradition, therefore? And one of the greatest embodiments, if you like, in a mythic sense of our tradition is Taliesin. He is the embodiment of the Welsh Bardic tradition. Historically, he's supposedly, you know, one of the founding fathers of the Welsh Bardic tradition as we have it. You know, a tradition that's been going now for like 1400 years of written Welsh poetry found in manuscripts. He's one of the earliest poets in that tradition. Many later court bards, you know, consider him to be the father of their lineage, of their tradition. So he's kind of like an obvious character to begin with, an obvious figure to go to ask these questions, metaphorically, if you like. And, you know, if you're serious about understanding Welsh mythology, and whatever the Welsh tradition is in its full sense, then you kind of have to, you can't avoid Taliesin. He's in the middle of it all. And he's kind of the voice of it in many ways, in a traditional sense. You know, he has this status in our culture to this day. You know, like if you go and study the history of Welsh poetry, you begin with Taliesin. If you want to understand what the Welsh Bardic tradition is about, you have to begin with the historical Taliesin. So he's at the heart of it all. Very early on, I was exposed to his story, the tale of Taliesin. Very early on, I was captivated by this idea of the transformations. So some people might know what I'm talking about there. In the legendary Taliesin poetry, we get these I am sections. You know, I've been a star, I've been a book, I've been, you know, the light of a lantern for a year and a half, I've been a path, I've been an eagle. These I have been passages. You know, I remember writing poetry under that influence, you know, when I was very, very young, maybe 12, 13, 14, something like that. Wow. So it's my first attempt at poetry were in the voice of Taliesin. My first real understanding of what Welsh mythology was my first flavour of it was the Taliesin story. So it's just kind of like always been part of my explorations into my tradition, I suppose. It begins and kind of ends with Taliesin, for sure. Mm-hmm. Well, what are we trying to do? If we're trying to respect our ancestral traditions, then, you know, one of my most popular phrases, if you like, is that we shouldn't ventriloquize the dead. Yeah, we shouldn't use the dead as puppets to say the things that we want to hear, because that would be disrespectful. Yeah, we want to actually hear what they actually had to say. Mm-hmm. And conveniently for us, you know, we don't all have to have magic superpowers to hear the dead, because they wrote stuff down. Yeah, so it's like, so for those of us who are limited to reading, let's say, then, you know, like, it's dead easy to go and listen to what they said, because they wrote all the important stuff down for us. And if that's the case, then you know, we can work consciously with integrity in what you might call an ancestral tradition, as in there's an explicit acknowledgement that this is given to us by the dead, by the ancestors, and therefore we can hear them and we can hear what they have to say. And what they have to say is very often very different to what we think they've
You're saying.
Because, of course, it's for us, this culture that we have is filtered through people. And, we're just limited human beings. We don't always get it right. And there's been a lot of misrepresentation about what the Welsh tradition is and what it isn't.
Yep.
And that's just part of the world that we're living in. So, if we want to work in a tradition with integrity, then let's not ventriloquize the dead. Let's spend some time and work out what they actually said. And then we can go off and play with it and be inspired and be all creative and full of awen and, and have a good, creative, energized time with it. But like, these are the two things, aren't they? Got to figure out, got to hear what they said first,
Yeah, got to get. Much of the Welsh mythology and folklore that I came across when I was in Seeking Land was actually overshadowed by Irish traditions. And one of my pet peeves is when somebody says Celtic, everybody goes to the Irish. But why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's two parts to that history. One part is that in terms of the preservation of medieval manuscripts, far more medieval literature survives in Ireland than it does in Wales. So there's just more of it. And therefore, Celtic studies naturally spends a bit more time on Irish literature. Just, that's not to say that Irish myths are more potent or survive in a better shape than the Welsh myths, because like our own myths are pretty potent and pokey as well. Thank you very much. And there's definitely enough Welsh mythology to be getting on with. It's not like we're short, on any of it really. So that's the first part. There's more Irish literature surviving from the medieval period. The other, I think, is just the overwhelming power of American culture, and that, in terms of the Celtic diaspora, as in where Celtic-speaking peoples ended up as they emigrated, over the last few hundred years, for whatever reason, the Welsh just. We're not as noisy. We're just not that you Irish folks are super noisy, but for whatever reason, American culture has quite a distinct appreciation of their Irish heritage. Irish American figures, the Kennedys, for example, just one example. They hold a particular resonance in American culture. So for American folks, Celtic really does mean Irish.
Yes. Exactly.
Even though there's as significant a Welsh presence in American culture historically, we're just not as obvious. Our cultural profile isn't as obvious as that of Ireland, and so I think that's where we get this confusion about what Celtic is, because Celtic is basically just a linguistic term. It just means a group of languages, technically speaking, and a visual culture as well, of course. But on the whole, it's a linguistic category that just means this branch of the Indo-European language family tree, which is Celtic. Yeah. Of which, and what's ironic, and I'm sure this is where some of your frustration comes from, Deborah, as it does with me, is that Welsh is actually the best surviving Celtic language. Unfortunately, there are far fewer Irish, Gaelic, and Scots Gaelic speakers than there are Welsh speakers. Like, there's about 500,000 of us, and even though we've got our problems, and it's not great, we've still survived in a much better condition as a language than any of the other Celtic languages. So that's also why it's a bit puzzling for us Welsh folks. Is like, why is Irish the only, why does Celtic mean Irish?
Exactly. Our ancient Welsh traditions is growing a global audience. I've seen that through your medium. In that academic study, how do you see the spiritual practice from the Welsh tradition coexisting?
So it's tricky. It is tricky. So almost all of the interest in Celtic spirituality is really an interest in Celtic paganism.
Mm-hmm.
And by paganism, we just mean anything that's not Christian, basically. And, unfortunately, that is what the category pagan means. It's a Christian name for everything that's not of the religion itself, not Christian. And of course, plenty of modern people sort of, claim the definition and the name proudly. Now, because Celtic spirituality is largely interested in Celtic paganism, that creates a tension because the Welsh scholarly tradition is essentially a Christian scholarly tradition. And for a very simple reason, Christianity is the dominant religion for a very, very long time, pushes all other types of belief to the margins, happens in Wales, happens in Ireland, happens everywhere. It also means that social power and social status accrues around Christianity, accrues to Christians. That means that, learning and scholarship and any type of intellectual life in the formal sense has its roots in the monastic tradition, because it's Christianity that turns up with, manuscript writing and learning in the formal sense.
Yep.
It also means that, when we look at how Welsh survives as a language, it's largely due to it's not the only reason it survives, but a big part of the reason why Welsh survives as a language is because of non-conformist Christians. So Welsh Christians who had had enough of the corruption and the wealth of the traditional church, if you like, the centralized church in Rome, and also aspects of Protestantism also, who were kind of sick of that and wanted their own Christianity. And so they wanted to teach Welsh people, Welsh common folk, how to read and write in Welsh so that they could better understand the Bible. Mm-hmm. And, 200 or 300 years ago, Welsh intellectual life was really dominated by Christianity because of that, because Christianity brings reading and writing to common folk who are otherwise illiterate. They learn to read and write so as to engage with the Bible and to discuss the Bible and to have an intellectual life outside of the universities and the sort of the aristocratic sort of organization of education. They want their own learning, they want their own intellectual life so they can better understand the Bible. And that's the root of our current day scholarship in Wales. So it's intensely Christian, although less so today, of course, because Christianity is diminishing in its influence. There's more atheism, there's far less religiosity.
Yeah.
But, only like 50 or 60 years ago, almost all Welsh scholars would have considered themselves one Christian of another type or another. So it's only the last generation that we've had a diminishing in the influence of Christianity and kind of a space, therefore, to begin exploring the non-Christian elements of our culture. But again, in terms of scholarship, the tradition of scholarship is still heavily skeptical. And it's not just skeptical of Christianity, but it's skeptical of anything that's too subjective. Mm-hmm. So any type of spirituality isn't really, well, that's something you do in the arts, That's not something you do in history. It's not something you do in linguistics. It's not something you do when you're studying medieval manuscripts. These are technical disciplines, And then you get people like me we're kind of, I'm a bit of a mongrel, I've kind of.
I'd rather call it a bridge.
A bridge, okay. A bridge. Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, a bridge. Who I've pursued. I mean, like, Jesus is great, peace and love, brilliant. I love it. All that, I appreciate the good stuff in Christianity. Like, I was never inspired by my Christian tradition. For whatever reason, what engaged me and what inspired me was whatever is non-Christian in our tradition, the mystical, spiritual material that we find in the Taliesin poetry and in the Welsh myths. So I'm in this position where I'm not really reflective of the broader academic tradition in Wales because, I'm not atheistic in that sense, as in really skeptical of any type of belief, and I'm not a Christian. I'm kind of bridging that world with the interest that I find in the broader lay community, if you like, where people who are not in universities, mainly English-speaking folks, whether they're Welsh or otherwise, who really want to know about this stuff too. So that's kind of fallen into this world. Just got to do right by the Welsh tradition here, which is that so spirituality, Christian or otherwise, really exists in the poetry in Wales.
Yeah.
That's where it survives. Yeah. Of course, it also survives in the other art forms, because all culture is basically spiritual, in my opinion. But really, when you're looking for the essence of Welsh-speaking, Welsh language spirituality, I'd say it's in the poetry, more than in technically the academia. Yeah.
I agree. I think the essence of spirit sits in every Welsh word. The place you are going to tell us about the story and what, without giving away too many beautiful secrets, that we want our participants on the Druid tour to experience firsthand. We are visiting Llyn Tegid, which is a site that's connected to our Welsh history and mythology. What is the approach that you're going to bring that story to life?
Oh, well, I thought I wasn't supposed to give away any beautiful secrets, but I'm gonna try and do it and maintain an air of mystery. So, in my understanding, and it's just my understanding, storytelling is about opening a certain space, if you like. It's about changing how the here and now, how the present moment feels. And storytelling is an invitation to view and be in the world in a different way. And of course, we take the symbols and the meaning of the story as sort of guideposts, signposts into how we find this new place. I'm going to leave it at that, because that's what I think the essence of good storytelling is about. It's going to be. Yeah, it's revealing a new place.
And do you believe that these people experiencing the physical locations of our Welsh myths and history changes the way they connect?
Yeah, it's not absolutely essential, because the earth is always beneath our feet. But fundamentally, if you're talking about a tradition which has evolved and grown out of a particular patch of soil, then of course, how could it not? It's going to make it far easier, let's say, to connect. I'm not saying you can't ever connect anywhere else, but of course it's going to make it much easier. It's a bit of a shortcut, really. Yeah.
And for those participants, what do you hope that engaging in your storytelling that they pass on and take away?
That they feel like they're part of a tradition as opposed to being observers of one.
Nice.
And that they feel welcome in that. And that there's no sense that we're not allowed. Because I'm a great believer in the universal spirit of humanity. Like, we're all in it together, don't care what you call yourself. And so, we want to bring everybody in, or there should be a welcome for everyone and a potential for everyone to join in a tradition which is really just made out of relationships. That's all traditions are. They're just networks of relationships over time, to boil them down to their essence. So, if we can meet each other and we can make each other feel welcome in a place, in a story, then that would be job done.
And that is a perfect way to ask you now, just to wrap up the interview, what kind of projects and research have you got ahead so that we can let people know before you come on the tour? And how to find you. Sorry, that's important.
Well, so all the work happens on the website, celticsource.online. That's where it all is. And there's loads of free videos and materials. There's years worth of free stuff there. So you don't feel like you've got to come on a paid course just to start working with me, if you like, through the telly, through the televisuals. So coming up, I'm revamping all of the Taliesin and Mabinogi materials.
Wow.
And it, it happens every year. I teach the same courses every year, but they're always so different because there's always new stuff, new research, new ways in. So I'm currently beginning a journey up quite a big mountain, which is to really rework the whole foundations of the courses. So we're going to be doing the Mabinogi again, in about a month's time, hopefully with a revamped first part of a much longer course. So just doing what I always do, Deborah, just like keep doing it, keep working with it, keep finding new ways in.
And it's work that is very, very beautiful. And I will be just putting up all of the details of how people to get into your different social media channels and on the different platforms. So Gwilym, I say, with my heart full of more knowledge than some great quotes that you've put out there again that you don't even know about until I tell you, oh, this is your quote. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very, very much for being part of this tour and making some time for the interview.